Peggy, ça marche?
Does it work? Peggy, does it work? I hope you all have your headsets, otherwise you won't be able to listen to us. What is...
Donc je vais le dire tout haut. Pour ceux qui n'ont pas besoin de casque, vous ne pourrez pas nous entendre. Il est récupéré à l'accueil. Bien. Pour le reste, je m'appelle Vincent Boulanger, je suis chargé des conférences.
My name is Vincent Boulanger. I'm in charge of the conferences, and I'm going to wait for the end of the announcement.
La thématique jeunes et entreprises au cœur de la transition, comment mieux vivre et travailler demain, sera évoquée par nos invités Dominique Méda, Salomé Saké, Julien Faure. Merci.
Merci à l'annonce.
So you have those audio devices to follow the conferences, and you can also go onto the app EnerGaïa that you can download. You can follow the conferences from wherever you are in the exhibition. You can just click on the conference that you want to follow, and you can follow them in English or in French, depending on your language of preference. And since everybody seems to be ready, I'm going to ask Madame Langevin to join me on stage to say a few words of welcome. Madame Langevin, Agnès Langevin is Vice President for the region Occitanie, in charge of climate, the Green Pact, and sustainable habitat. Hello, everyone. It is a bit strange not to hear my own voice in the room, but I think you'll hear me in your headsets. First of all, thank you to everyone for attending this EnerGaïa fair, which is now a traditional place for sustainable energy transition and renewable energies, and also about mobilities and major projects for the Occitanie region, floating wind farms. And also, I would like to thank our guest speakers, Dominique Méda, Salomé Saké, and Julia Faure, who are here to talk about a topic which is not a small topic after the energy transition of our territory, and more globally speaking of our French model, which is the question of what are the young people are going to follow this energy transition, and what are they going to do with this energy transition, and as a consequence, jobs and training. We have innovated in Occitania with the implementation of a sustainable revenue to support all the young people who do some training programs linked to the energy transition, not have to be deprived of anything while they follow their passion and learn about that. It's a tool, it's a device, it's an allowance of money that addresses the needs of the young people. And they're committed, and we should morally support them to prepare for their future and also their conditions of life presently. So thank you very much. So I invite our speakers, 3 ladies. This is also a good sign from the region Occitanie. We are always very aware of gender parity. So it's 3 ladies because you are part of those of this round table, Madame Langevin. I'm going to use the headset because otherwise I won't hear you. Dominique Méda, well-known speaker. You are a philosopher. You are a sociology professor. You are head of the Research Institute in Social Science called ERISO, which is attached to the University Paris Dauphine. You're also producer with France Culture, and you moderate a podcast on working conditions, and you focus a lot on young people. On France Culture, what is your podcast called? It's called Why Are Things This Way? And you also have a regular editorial on Le Monde newspaper on working conditions and on the evolution of the world, the job market. And you wrote a beautiful piece of work with Isabelle Ferraras and Julie Batilana called The Work Manifest. It was released in 2020. So the Work Manifest, democratize, depollute, and demercantile, and also an edition of the Que sais-je, which is like a book to explain what are the origins of work and how it is evolving in the future. So in a few pages, you have a global vision on how work has evolved in its intellectual conception, in the guiding principles. Thank you. And how it is considered today as something that is fundamental to human beings throughout time. Salomé Saké, you are a journalist. You are in charge of the hub economy of the online media Blast. You're also a journalist for Si Politique by France 5. I'm not doing this program anymore. I work at the 9 o'clock program where there's a lot of debates. You also released a book in March 2023, which is also going to come up on the screen in a minute, and it is called Be Young and Be Quiet. So for those who criticize young people, with the editions Payot, and it's about a survey on the situation of the youth today, with some interviews of professionals, statistics, and I was quite sorry to see what state was the French youth today in, but I fully recommend you to read it, and not only the young ones. And the book of Salomé, she'll be doing a signing session after this session. She'll be signing her book. Julia Faure, not finally, third, Julia Faure, co-president of the movement Impact France and co-founder of the company Loom. You'll explain to us how you managed to create this brand. It's a sustainable brand produced locally. You also launched the association in climate mode that now counts 630 members. And 100 of other brands of clothes, and your aim is to transform the textile industry in the world to make it more sustainable. And I think I also have a picture of this is your internet site, and then there's Agnès Langevin, who's a vice president of the region Occitanie in charge of climate, the Green Pact, and sustainable habitats. And so you're, of course, extremely interested and involved in all the issues that we will debate this morning. So we're going to start with you, Julia Faure, to start finding out about what's this movement, Impact France. What is this about? So Impact France is like the MEDEF, which is a grouping of business leaders and heads of companies. And what we are trying to do is that the economic performance of companies is aligned with common interest. It's the same definition for an impact company. It's a company on which the activity is within the donut concept. Does anybody know what the donut concept know? It was created by an economist called Kate R. I forgot her name, and that says that we need to pollute and destroy a little bit the environment to get to a minimal living standard. If you want to buy a house, to own a house, live in a house, of course you're going to have to cut down a few trees, but you shouldn't do it above the limit of the sustainability of our planet. So you can pollute a little bit of water because, of course, this is what is requested by human activity. But if you go above a certain threshold, you start endangering the sustainability of the planet and our survival. So in this exercise of producing equals polluting, the companies are, of course, responsible for that. And our goal is that economic activity stays in the limit of the donuts, that it allows people, of course, to live and reduce inequalities without jeopardizing our future, because we would have gone too far from an environmental point of view. So how do you become an impact enterprise company? Well, there are two questions here, is how do you do it and why do you do it? How do you do it? It's easy. You can have a compensation policy that is based on gender parity. You can do an environmental design of your product. You can recycle. There's a lot of criteria that you can apply to be considered an impact company. If you have a lot of benefits for social progress, fighting against anti-personal minds, etc., it won't qualify as an impact company. The real question is, what does it produce? Does it lead us to an economy that fits into that donut economy? Can it reduce our environmental impact and inequalities, or does it just worsen the current situation? That's the definition. So it has to serve the common good. That's what the definition of an enterprise with impact. How do we do it? And the third aspect is, how do we change the rules? Because the economic world is known for its capacity to influence laws, to whisper at the ear of the world leaders. I thought we were going to talk about that later on. So what do we do? How do we do it? And how do we change the rules? That's just a little teasing for the next debate. So yeah, that helps me to stay focused. Thank you. Agnès Langevin, I wanted to ask you, at the region, you have a particular action to support this type of companies. We have moved the cursor of what we call the circular economy with a local regional ecosystem, a very dynamic ecosystem with young people and people who are not that young, less young, entrepreneurs, who are at the same time within this donut scheme. But also they're conducting actions and activities that fight against, for example, the collapse of biodiversity, the resources economy, functional economies of uses and not just property, about the reuse economy as well, giving a second life to a lot of objects, and who based their model on cooperation. And I think this is fundamental when in what we have to produce together, relationships between consumers, users, and companies, but also between companies among themselves, companies and decision makers, and who will have another model than the one that I learned, when I was growing up. So all these companies of circular economy, we also support all the changes in companies that make the economic network of the region with some levers of actions, going from some subsidies to some stakes in the capital of companies, which the heart of the business will accelerate this transition or decarbonize their production processes. Yes, we'll go back to that later on. We may have to take it one step forward to Julia Faure, the EnerGaïa fair. It's 400 companies working on renewable energies. Are they positive impact companies? I would like to tell you yes, if it was the heart of their activities, but there's one that is very famous for renewable energies, but clearly jeopardized the future of our planet. So it was total, yes, that's what I wanted to say. But it's interesting because the heart of the business of Total is not renewable energies, it's fossil energies. So there's, of course, a scientific international consensus that is meeting at the moment, you know where, who says if we want to maintain the sustainability of the planet, we need to get out of the fossil fuels industries. And if there's one company that is exactly the opposite of an impact enterprise, it is Total. And yet Total produces as well renewable energies, but because it is not its major activity, but a side business, like a hobby for them, it's the opposite of an impact company. It's not only Total, it's BP, Shell, they all develop renewable energies. And also companies such as from the Gulf countries. If tomorrow Total says, okay, you're right, Julia Faure, I give up we give up fossil fuel energies and we'll just concentrate on renewable energies, then I'll give them an award. If the heart of their business changes, I don't have an issue with them. A quick question for both of you. This movement of companies, is it new? Did you anticipate it? How do you assess this emergence of not only impact trends, but yes, this movement is clearly emerging. And I think we met in Dauphine when one of my colleagues wrote a book, a very interesting book called From Waste to Sobriety, to Frugality. And I think you came and told us about your company and what you're doing. And we also had a recent emission with France Inter with the general delegate of Impact France, and there was also a person who was in charge of an interesting movement called the Convention of Companies for the Climate. So people who commit to respect the minus 55%. So we'll go back to that, changing the rules and seeing what the political weight of these movements. Salomé Sake, yes, I'm also very looking forward to the fact that there's some companies that finally get involved and change their economic model. But it shouldn't outshine the fact that we need political measures to provide a structure to all that. And it's good that companies get involved, but we cannot do without a legal framework. And I think it is a bit of the danger to tell companies to go change the world, because we cannot count just on them. So it's good to remind them of that and remind ourselves of that. No, it's fundamental, because we need to give the political tools to companies to change things. We need to help the companies willing to make changes and change their economic model, sometimes at the detriment of their profitability. But it has to be within a framework, happening within a framework, particularly since there are companies who are going to do the famous greenwashing, or they're going to do a lot of communication, and they're going to base everything on the green communication, while their business does not follow suit. So we need a more general framework. Even, of course, initiatives are very important. Julia, you want to say a word? Yes, it's very important. What Salome said, it's the base of Impact France. We were pioneers at the beginning. We believed a lot in individual efforts. I do clothes, so I'm going to produce only in Europe versus, clothes that are produced in Asia in horrible conditions. I'm going to try to relocalize. I produce a lot in Portugal. Then I'm going to try to move back to France, my production sites in France. And you realize that our individual efforts do not produce systemic changes. Most of the clothes sold on the market are made in places in horrible conditions, so it doesn't induce any systemic change. So it's great to try to depollute the sea, but if next to you there's a big oil boat tanker who spreads oil everywhere, it goes against all your efforts. Second, your efforts to reach the impact are not serving us. If you're in the business world, you must know it. The more a company does bad things, the more profitable it is. You must all know it. In the energy market, there's this question: why don't we have more wind parks? And why we're still using coal and coal? So we have in the textile. I give you an example. If I decide to produce the shirt, Salome's shirt, I decided to produce it in Portugal. It's going to cost me about 25 euros to produce it in normal conditions and, with a good material, eco-sustainable. If I do it in Bangladesh, it's going to cost me 7 euros. That's easy. The choice is easy. Either I might buy it I produce it in Bangladesh and I make a bigger margin. I have no economic interest to relocalize my production to Portugal. And that's exactly what are the market rules today. Why the most destructive companies are so powerful? Because the world market helps the companies that are destructive, so the ones that want to make an impact are a minority. So like Salome said, we need to group the companies that are with impact or that want to change things to have more influence over the rules of the game and over the laws, and we can trying to turn around this bonus for destructive companies. Companies have a role to play on that because throughout time, companies have always tried to influence the laws, and that's what they're doing now. We cannot reach a satisfying agreement at the co-op because the oil lobbies are trying to destroy it. We need to do the same thing on our end. Responsible people, companies that try to do a better job, we need to use our influence to create a counterpower.
And yes, Angelina, yes, I just wanted to interrupt you in terms of the way you see the section related to access to more virtuous products, which are more expensive. You were talking about the issues related to sales of textiles, for instance. And we can see this in organic products as well, because with the problems of purchasing power and increased poverty, these become an issue. But there's an impact on the development of companies in a positive way. So how do you look at the junction between these two? And then this is very, very interesting to raise this issue right now, because what's underlying what you're saying is low cost creates purchasing power. At Leclerc, the head of Leclerc supermarkets talked about low cost in this way, and yet it produces poverty in textiles, for example. If we delocalize the production from France abroad, these are people who are not paid in France, and these are people who are not under the regulations of the state. And so it's research which is not being financed. So what this also means is these are direct jobs that are not being funded. In the Vosges, for example, we have bakeries that are closing and all the attendant services. In textiles, for example, we never had as much low cost, never as many cheap clothes, and never as much poverty in France. And France has never become more poorer because of the textile situation. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that when you buy clothes in China rather than France, on the scale of a country, France is actually importing almost all its clothes. It's as if you went out to eat in a restaurant every evening rather than eating at home. Ultimately, you would have spent everything outside, so you wouldn't have any money. And so if you go out and eat at the Chinese textile restaurant, we'll get to a situation where the commercial deficit in textiles in France is, well, I think it's 12 million euros. So this means that France is becoming poorer because of this low-cost situation. And there are all the heads of low-cost who are saying that they're providing a service for the purchasing power. So if we're talking about low cost serving the poorest, this is absolutely not true. These companies are actually getting rich on this basis. I totally agree with you. And there's also the political effects as well. The fact that we've delocalized extensively in textiles as well as other service areas of industry. And this leads to voting for extreme parties as well. We're seeing this in America and in other parts of Europe. So these are the consequences, which are very, very frightening. So we'll be talking about this in a few minutes, unless Salome wanted to add something at this point. So we're going to come back to our target here. So I wanted to talk to you, Dominique Médard, about the working conditions, because you were talking about a crisis of employment in France. We're going to be able to have a look at some slides which you passed on to me. Thank you very much for these slides. So what do we mean when we're talking about a work crisis, which you describe and denounce? I think this is something which is not very well known, in fact. In terms of working conditions, France is very badly positioned. On one hand, we have a survey in France in relation to work conditions, which shows that since the 1990s, we're seeing a degradation in working conditions and an intensification of work, producing more in less and less time. And we have another survey which was taken place in Europe. You can see. Could we screen the slides, please? Yep, obviously that would be better. So what you see here as the results is a European survey on work conditions. This was 2021, and it shows that France is right at the back of the list here. You can see the results in terms of the difficulty of work. We're in the red area, painful positions, heavy loads that people have to carry. So in orange here, you have the good students, Germany in pink, Denmark in green, the Netherlands in white. And then here you have the light colors, where France is not only one of the best. The European Union, the 27 members of the European Union are also badly placed in here in terms of physical difficulties, but also in. Do you have the next slide? No, I just kept 5 of your slides here. So if we continue, so you didn't actually give me any clear indications about what you wanted me to show. So let's look at the second slide here. So this shows us emotional constraints. Here at the top, you can see people who consider that they are subjected to emotional constraints, which means that they can't manage their work. And the other side is the discrimination side at work over the last 12 months. And there are 2 other important slides. Let's have the next slide, please. One of them shows us that the support from colleagues is too rare. And so this is very important. And there are 2 other images, which one of them is going to show you the fact that French employees have very little influence on the decisions made in their work. We're very, very bad students from that point of view. You can't change their work or the decisions related to your work in the different companies. And there's a final slide. Yes, there's a final one. So in terms of we are very badly rewarded for the efforts that we do make. So you have 40% of French people consider that they're well rewarded for their efforts, and compared to a much higher score for the Germans. And so there's a global index, which we call work quality, which shows that we're looking at pretty much the same level as Slovakia. It's 40% of people who are in a difficult job with high expectations and very few resources to face this situation. So it's depressing, but I don't think it's over yet. So, could you tell us a bit about the young people in particular? As if I've got my phone here, I'm taking notes. I'm not consulting my messages. So that I don't use paper and we can protect forests. It's a good thing that we've started with this situation, because it's in this economic context that young people are starting their careers. So we perhaps need to define who young people actually are. Maybe some of you are asking yourself the questions as to whether you're young. You're young until you're 29 years old. We're talking about the 18 to 29-year-olds in this bracket. It's important to look at their work conditions, what their expectations or hopes are. I'm not saying that you're old when you're 30, but we're talking about these statistics here. And it's important for young people as well to understand how their peers are experiencing work. So I'm going to be talking about young people in terms of the statistics, but it's important to remember that young people are not a single unit, which is completely homogeneous. There's a plurality, there are different types of young people. It's a general context that I'm going to be trying to describe to you at the moment. So at the moment, the economic context is essentially an economic crisis and precarity, because we're in a situation here which has a negative effect for young people. Young people are subjected to economic conditions which are less good. People say, well, yes, but there was a lot of unemployment in 1980s. There were economic difficulties previously. Previous generations have experienced it. But there are many ways in which young people today are subjected to much more difficult conditions. And they're in the most difficult situation. They're the group which live under the poverty line, and they represent half the people in queues for food aid and have difficulty to food and housing. They're right at the top of these lists, and this is the context where they're trying to follow their studies. And at the end of this, they come into the working market, the work market. Their jobs are less well rewarded financially, even when we take into consideration inflation. And in terms of how young people see things, they'll see older people who will be saying, yes, well, we used to work harder, but the work conditions weren't the same. And that comes back to exactly what Dominique was saying in terms of work crisis. There's a major change, which is the flexibilization of the market. Young people are the first people to suffer from this. They're the first ones to have jobs which are so flexible with short-term contracts, and these are jobs which they are subjected to. It's not the idea of young people being able to be free at last. These jobs are something that they're subjected to. To give you a figure, in 86, 17% of precarious jobs amongst young people. And today this is much higher, meaning that we have less access as well to social protection. If for illness, for example, at work, we don't have paid holidays. And all this means that a very large section of young people say, well, what's the point? Why invest in this work market, which treats us in this way? Each economic crisis, and this has been very striking during the COVID period, with each economic crisis, young people are the first to be fired or the first to be hired again. So during COVID, there was a drastic drop in jobs in employment are young people. And since the 1980s, young people have a level of unemployment which is 4 times higher than the rest of the population. I think it's important to keep these figures in mind when we're talking, when we go on to talk about young people and unemployment a bit later. So what I wanted to do was to try and get some, if you've finished what you wanted to say in this area, perhaps Dominique Méda could tell us something about your observations and the trends that you're seeing and that you're studying. Yes, I just would like to add one last thing. This is a preconceived idea that when you're young, you have difficulties, but you're going to be able to catch up, make up for it later in your life. And once again, this is absolutely false. When we look at the statistics, what we are actually seeing is that over the last 20 years, they don't make up this difference. They're less well paid at the beginning of their careers, but they remain so throughout their careers as well. If you look at the works which have demonstrated very clearly about the scar effect. Not only do you have a structural disadvantage in life, but you maintain this problem or this economic handicap throughout your life. And this is part of an economic context where there's a concentration of heritage, of patrimony. In the 1970s, 35% of what we detained was inherited. Today, we're looking at 60%, meaning that not only are we less well paid, we're less paid for a longer period, we're more precarious jobs, but even when we do manage to earn money, we can't catch up the delay in terms of inherited wealth. We can't invest in, for example, in real estate, with the kinds of salaries that we have. And so we really have an economic system which is structurally organized against young people. I absolutely agree. We're talking about a scarification or the scarring effect of the economic situation when you go into the work market. And so we're in a real paradox here because the level of education amongst young people has never been higher. We're seeing an increase over the last 30 years in the level of training and education in young people. Is worse and worse in a sense. I absolutely confirm what Salome's just said. The number of people in short-term contracts, people take longer and longer to reach a stable situation in their employment. And we mustn't say that all young people are affected in the same way. It's very important to make distinctions. We're talking about the Z generation, etc., as if they were radically different generations. But there's a lot of difference within a generation between young people who have a lot of qualifications, will have problems throughout their life, so who don't have very many qualifications, and those who do have plenty of qualifications. And they're living well. But we're facing this huge paradox where we're seeing this increase in the level of education, but this is not rewarded. And there's a kind of barrier right from the start for young people. And these are the worst possible working conditions. I could show you another graph where you can see that this comes from the Ministry of Employment, that 37% of people consider that they're not able to continue working until their retirement. There's a lot of discussion about reforming the retirement system, but something like 60% of people say that they cannot in any way imagine staying in this same job until the age of retirement. And so is this because people don't want to work? Well, Salome knows as well as I do all about the stereotypes. I found an inquiry from, it goes back to 72, where bosses were saying, oh, we can't find people with the same interest in working as was previously the case. Young people want to work, but they don't want to work under any old conditions. They want to be well paid. And generally, whether it's in 72, 2008 or today, the expectations of young people in terms of jobs are just the same as they are for older people. A good salary, interesting work, a good work atmosphere, but they're more intense in terms of the other age groups. So they they want this even more than others, but they have less access to it. Salome, this stereotype that's just been referred to, whereby young people are lazy and don't want to work. Would you like to say a word about this? It's not just a saying, it's just my old uncle would trot out. It's something we hear in the media. We have debates that revolve around the idea that young people don't want to work anymore. In my book, we talk about the BFM. It's a huge cliche about a whole generation. And you, as a young journalist, if I say boomers are egotistical, for example, this is a cliche, and it would be a shocking thing to say and would be decried. But for young people, we allow ourselves to disseminate insulting stereotypes, and which is completely wrong. There's when we talk about the lazy generation in the press, and once again, it's not just a little cliche, and in fact, it's absolutely wrong. This is something that we're seeing in all the surveys, in the sociological studies, as well as in the field, having interviewed several young people. Nobody or very few people, apart from a few exceptions, want to sit around doing nothing all day. They want to accomplish something, to be fulfilled. And this, for many people, involves work, but not just any work. And this is important to remember and to understand. We're talking about seasonal problems in work, for example, which the media has talked about. And this is because these jobs are precarious, badly paid, and not gratifying. And because of all these work conditions, we find ourselves in situations where young people no longer want to do these jobs. And also, if we look at the reform in unemployment rules, we're talking about 6 months only with the new reforms. And this, once again, this is discouraging for people who are working on a seasonal basis. People want to accomplish themselves and fulfill themselves in work. But unfortunately, the whole point of my study and other studies have shown that the work market doesn't propose this kind of fulfillment. And perhaps later we'll be looking at the general crisis that we're finding ourselves in. Work crisis, economic crisis, real estate crisis or housing crisis, and the ecological crisis. You want to be able to give everything to an economic system which is so restrictive. And young people, not all young people, but some, the urban classes, the people with qualifications, also are experiencing a crisis in terms of the meaning of what they're doing. Well, we'll look at that in a few minutes. In the past, we used to talk about this idea, this cliche of young people, that they're lazy. Not only they have been criticized since ancient times in terms of this laziness. I think it's fascinating. It's always the same. They're narcissistic, egotistical. They're less civilized or cultured, as well as being lazy. And so this has always been false. Maybe when I'm 70, I'll start saying that young people don't really want to work. But it's always been just as false. And this is the case today. There isn't any generation which, and this was before Fortnite, the question as to whether young people were better before. In the book, young people were not better. Young people are different. They have different parameters. There are different social parameters. And they do what they can, like every other generation before them, with the socio-economic and political parameters that they have. And the message of my book is to say not only they're doing as well as they can, but they're doing pretty well. Dominique Mira? Yeah, I just wanted to add a word about this, la grande émission, the idea of refusing work. Nobody wanted to work anymore with the idea of the rupture. But the surveys have shown this is absolutely wrong, that in actual fact, people have gone back after COVID to leave jobs with unbearable working conditions to go on to jobs which were more acceptable and slightly more comfortable. Agnès, with the situation for young people today and the message that we're hearing for against young people, No, we are saying exactly the same thing in our region, Occitanie, with the degradation of the situation, with the increased precarity, high unemployment levels. And hearing you speak, I was thinking about the policies that we're leading with Carole Delga, the president of our region, to help these young people. And it's true that since 2019, we've opened up, unfortunately, with the need to adapt to the reality that we were seeing around us, we've opened a lot of systems, whether it's free transport, for example, by train, buses, school transport, free manuals or computers at school, for instance, or in high schools. We've mobilized a lot of finance to accompany and support the orientation of education. When I was talking earlier about the young people, but there are other systems, for example, or schemes to fight against food precarity, with the distribution of fresh products which are handed to students. We'd never done this previously. Also, the possibility of accompanying and supporting the psychological effect on young people, young students in particular, with the degradation that we're seeing of their situation. We're going to be voting tomorrow for a plan to focus on housing for young people, with hybrid proposals varying from generational participatory accommodation to other forms of accommodation. And it's true that I've always been very moved, because I think these are difficult situations for the parents, but by the requests made to elected representatives, parents who are unable, as from middle school, are unable to find a training placement, for example, when the students are on work study programs. And there's already an obstacle because the parents don't have the kind of relations with the right people to obtain for their children work placements. I have a perfect example because my own daughter had difficulties in this area. And we can see the way in which parents feel almost humiliated in not being able to support their children in access to these work-study placements. And as from middle school, they're facing this work universe, and I think we still have a lot of progress to make. We set up an application, which is a criterion for helping the companies. We ask the companies that we give a grant aid to welcome students who are on work-study programs, so that we can really ensure the supply and demand with this first access to companies. Julia Fort, would you like to say a word or two? No, just to come back to what you said about the school path, because to try and understand what young people actually experience, I'm delighted that elected politicians are trying to improve the situation. But this is not what we're seeing on a national level. I'm not, battering Emmanuel Macron, but in terms of the various studies that have come out, each time what we're seeing is that reproduction of inequality is even stronger, and the school system is more and more defective in being able to correct these discrepancies. When you get to the work market, you have to really remember that a whole series of frustrations have started for these young people right from the beginning with the reproduction of inequalities in terms of figures. We have, I can't remember, the INGEP, I think, a French institute, which shows that for a normal, similar educational path, we have a young person from a poor background who has 2 times less getting into a technological stream at school compared to a child from a more affluent background. So you can really understand why pupils ask themselves questions as to whether it's worth it when, with this meritocratic system, they're not being treated as equals. We can also look at university figures where the growth rate of private schools for higher education is increasing at the same time as the public school system in France is deteriorating. We're talking about school fees for these institutes which range between 6,000 and 12,000 euros. And this now represents a quarter of higher education. 20 years ago, this was not the case. And so we're seeing public training with access to quality free education, which already creates strong inequalities and at the same time produces a phenomenon of social reproduction. And at the same time, the idea of being left aside. So we have one figure which I think is very eloquent, which is the Survey Institute. Over the last 50 years, we've been asking the same questions to young people for the last 50 years. We ask them whether they get the feeling that they're unlucky in living through the period they're living in. And ever since 1970s, there are a number of young people who get the feeling that they're unlucky to be living in these times. The number has doubled. This means that a kind of pessimism which occurs in terms of their choices. They're getting the worst deal at every single level, particularly people who come from difficult backgrounds, and they're confronting a number of obstacles which are considered. At the same time, the middle classes have fewer difficulties. But they too are increasing in the number of difficulties that they're facing. And this creates a huge number of frustrations with a lot of testimonies. There's a little heterogeneous group of young people who inherit, who have all the economic, cultural and social capital. We're talking about something like 10% of the population. But the major part of young people is very frustrated and have a very deep sense of inequality.
So a last word on that, and then we're going to move on to the solutions for the future. It was just to confirm that we have a school system that is more and more selective and is based on the logic of failure. You can see that you're 40,000 in applying for training, so it's horrible for your self-esteem, and it's going to happen again. We have really cost-to-effect system between, continuation between the school system and the job market. So it's the same people who have been fail at school, they're going to fail at work, fail finding a job. And however, Salome, and this is the last thing I will say on the subject, the first worry of the young people in all surveys, it's work or the studies. It's not in the environment or it's not society. It's what am I going to do with my life? And that's what worries them more than anything else. And the system does not address this concern. It's really an existential concern. Let's look into the future and the meaning that work should have in the future and what the companies are doing for that. So to do this transition, I'm going to ask Julia Faure if the employees are better treated in an impact company than elsewhere, because afterwards you can work like a dog and save the planet. What are the working conditions in an impact company? It's all perfect, no? This definition of the impact company, in Impact France, we have our own definition with a score, so we can measure it, and that takes into account what makes the employees happy, so working conditions, but of course sharing the workload and the responsibilities. And we we ask people about how they feel about their working conditions. It's a fundamental point. Anybody who did some management, you knew that the best person to improve the efficiency of his own job is is a person himself at this job station. So that's not the issue. In an impact company, you have better working conditions. So let's not forget that what context that we're talking about. Are we bonus for vice, so to speak, the bad companies? There's less money in those, so it's easier to have a policy, to have a good compensation policy and a generous policy. If you are, I'm going to use the example of Total again. If you do billions of benefits, you can be very generous when you pay your wages. You can have a free cafeteria like Google does. You can have, daycare center. So that's the problem of the impact company, because it doesn't have that much money to spend. And because there's a lot of great companies which have very precarious working conditions, all those socially orientated companies, that's a disadvantage for the impact company on working conditions. Its advantage is that you work for something that has a meaning. And the more you advance in life and the more you get mature, the more, the worse you feel about not contributing to the happiness of the world. I started my career at Amazon, and after 2 years, I was feeling depressed, and I had to leave so I could do something else. So there's this crisis for values and meaning to try to achieve a cause that is serving the common good is not only making yourself happy, but when you go out for dinner with friends, you're less ashamed to tell people what you do for a living. So that's the plus. You'll feel better about talking about yourself and your job. Mental health is important. And what is the purpose of an impact company? It is, and in general, impact economies, it's to put an economy at the service of the common good. That's the general goal, is to take all the resources and using them as best as possible so it serves everyone. That's what efficiency should be trying to achieve. If you think that my economic efficiency is serving the general good, it's also going to serve your employees and even the head of the company, the manager of this company. I am the leader of my company, and I like my life to be good. I like to have good benefits and a good social package health plan, So you want to change the reality of people as well. And the first reality that impacts us the first is our employees and our suppliers, our suppliers. So if we manage to suppress this bonus for bad companies, life would be better with our type of companies. So tell me a word on this this crisis of values. Is this something that the young people feel very strongly? Our sociologists show that there's this appetite, this will to put meaning into what they do. I'd like to speak under the control of Salome, but if I look at the surveys that we have, there's a part of the young people who are looking for this kind of meaningful jobs, but that's also happening within the other generations. It's not only for the young people trying to look for meaning in what they do, but it's still a minority today. I have colleagues who created a book called Putting Meaning Back into a Job, and they did some calculations, and they used all the surveys available, and they say that the meaning of work is made of 3 elements. It's feeling useful, not having some ethical conflicts, and being able to change the world. And they come up with a list of meaningful jobs. So first of all, you have the nurses and people, social workers. Everybody works with the public. But we often hear the voices of young people asking for more meaning in what they do, but I'm not sure that the large majority of them are do that. There was an article in the Le Monde, the newspaper, a few days ago, dedicated to those young people who don't care about anything, don't care about meaningful jobs, they don't care about the environment, they just want to make a lot of money and have a lot of benefits, and they don't care about the rest. And if you look at where are the kids coming from business school, where do they work? They work in luxury, they work in banks, and they work in companies that are not necessarily very environmentally friendly. Salome, that's where you measure the diversity of the young people. There's some various different aspirations. You've seen some movements of young people in the media among engineers, Polytechnique, AgroParisTech. There's some young people really standing against the framework, the legal framework that allow us to have a company such as Total. Again, we're using this as an example, and they're calling their peers to refuse to work for those companies. But let's not make it a generality, because the first criteria for the young people is well-being, self-well-being. It's the capacity to have a good life, and maybe that's what makes the difference between the young people today and the previous generations, is the work and life balance is different. If they have a choice between a job that is not going to be the job that they are going to be proud talking about, they may choose still the ethical job. And I can't compare it to what the previous generations did if they were faced with the same choice. We don't have any surveys, sociological surveys, that would have studied this relationship with the young people to ethics. But there's a survey that says that 59% of the young people consider that to be useful to society is very important. 65% of the young people who say that they're ready to stop working for a company that does not take into account the environment. But these are not sociological surveys which used a big sample of people, So we have to be careful with those numbers. I completely agree with you with that. We take a minority class of the good universities, who had a chance to think about this question. There's some young people who, yes, tell themselves, no, I don't want to work all my life in this field. I was thinking about Anne-Flore Le Gaulle, who's a student of HEC, which is the major French business school. And they don't necessarily promote ethics or environment. And when she took the floor, she actually asked everyone to give up some companies, to transform some companies, and to break away from this economic model that destroys the planet. So I don't like the name of lazy generation. It is also stupid to talk about the climate generation. There are some young people trying to make do with all these parameters that are very concerning. There's a generational difference, is that there's a worry for the climate that is more important with the younger ones than the older ones. And I insist that that doesn't mean that all the young people are environmental activists. It means that they know that it's what we call the eco-anxiety phenomenon. It's the feeling of being powerless, and that does not going to be translated in the choice of the job that they have. Because jobs are precarious. The job market is not in their favor, so they cannot necessarily afford to make the choices that they would like to make. We talked about the young ones who work in luxury, the luxury sector, but there's also the young people who work for McDonald's, who work for Deliveroo, who work for companies that pollute the world and have very low-paying jobs, and they can't really be difficult about the choice of the company that hires them. So there's a phenomenon within the big schools, universities and business schools, where they make a choice on how they want to live. but it's not a global phenomenon. But if you propose to the young ones some ethical jobs, I think they will be happy to accept them, and they will be happy to feel that they work for the common good, because it is an element of the quality of a job. But apart for the most activist of them, it won't be the priority when they choose a job. Just a question before, since you have the floor, the crisis of the meaning is not just for the young one. You know, the whole job market is worried about that. They have a conscience, and is this existential crisis, is it just for this generation, or is it wider than that? No, I think it's quite widespread, but it seems to be more acute within the young ones, because they are the ones who are going to spend the major part of their life in difficult environmental conditions. I wanted to mention the survey of Louis Harris for the Association for an Environmental Awakening, and they screened 2,000 young people on their expectations towards the jobs. And that survey shows that 7 young people out of 10 could refuse to apply to a company that does not worry about the environment, is not ethical from an environmental point of view, and 5 out of 10 could resign from such a company, or a company that doesn't have virtuous behavior. Salome, why, when we talk about ethics, we immediately link it to ecology? Because it is the biggest worry, the first ethical concern of young people. They're more concerned by global warming because they're going to be affected by it. And those are the numbers from the IPCC that tell us that a person who was born in 2020 is going to have 7 times more heat waves than a person who was born in 1960. So even if we're all going to be affected by it, the young ones are going to be affected by it longer. So that's why they're more worried without wanting to be scientific experts. And that's why it's one of the first worries is not the ethic concerns are not always about what's happening in the other side of the world with Indians making clothes. It's the ecological crisis because it affects us directly, including in France on our own land. Agnès Langevin, yes, I was thinking about this survey, which told us that a percentage of young people gave up the idea of having a child for reasons linked to the environment and the climate. Yes, and the questions of having kids is if you feel like you live in a time where everything is not going your way, and there's a deep feeling of pessimism. And for some young people, it pushes them to give up the idea, the desire of having children. And the natality rate is decreasing. And the first young people don't want kids for environmental reasons. It's not because of the carbon footprint of the kid himself. It's because they're afraid, because they feel that they won't be able to provide normal living conditions to this child. Even if I work a lot, I won't be able to protect my child from what's happening. And it's so deep in them, in the youth, that some of them don't want to make babies anymore because they don't feel capable to protect their children. And we see that in all demographies, when there's war, when there's anything bad going on in society, the natality drops. I would like to close the chapter of the assessment to maybe look into the future and decide what we can do to change that. So, Dominique Méda, what is the future of work? What should it be linked to? Is the energy transition, is it positive? And what is the link to be made between both words? If we start worrying about the ecological conversion, I think we could change the mentalities or values, more green, more sobriety, more frugality. All the modern since the 18th century, the more we produce, the better it is. The more the higher is our GDP, the better it is. I think we have to break away from this model. That's why I talk about conversion and reconversion, because if we completely change our productive system, it's going to be a lot of changes. And if we do it well, we can have a double bonus, a double dividend. We can create jobs, so we can break away from the job crisis that we have now. And if we're really smart, we can change the job market. Why would we create jobs? Because we have to reduce a number of sectors and develop some other ones. And those sectors are more labor intensive. The thermal renovation of buildings, an agriculture that is not conventional to reduce our structure so we have less individual cars, renewable energies, etc. So it's more labor intensive, and we can create a lot of jobs, and we'll also need more human work. If we use more machines that are based on renewable energies, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and work at it. So some people say that we can create 600,000 jobs by 2030. Some go up to 1,800,000 jobs. Ernst & Young but if we invest enough, and as you know, we had the major report from Pisani-Mafous that told us that we should invest 60 billion euros more every year, and that as soon as this report was released, the next day the government said that they didn't wish to increase the debt level of France nor taxes. So we don't know how we're going to come up with that money. But if we have massive investment, then we'll create a lot of jobs. But we'll have to maybe be careful about the transfer of labor that's going to happen, because we should do it at the detriment of the people who work in sectors that are going to have to close. And we haven't anticipated yet. We have very little studies at our disposal. There was a plan that was made on the skills, and we looked at several sectors, building, mobility, transport, etc. We should see what kind of jobs would disappear and what jobs would be created. And we haven't had anything yet, so we're kind of in the dark. And also, we should change work, and we should we should remodel this stupid chain of production, have production in different places of the world and having them shipped around, and that's completely insane. We should really relocalize our companies and have some short loops. And there's a possibility, if we're smart, to change work, and we should even review the governance of companies. One of the ways to get out of the crisis is to change the governance of company and to break away from this idea that a company is here only to make profit. It's the Milton Friedman company. A company has only one responsibility, is to be profitable. No, that's not what a company is about. It's made of different elements. Some people bring in capital. Some people are working. Some people are bringing their labor. And that's an idea that we have with our colleagues, is that what we propose is that there are two rooms, one that bring capital investor, and they would be represented. Some would bring the capital, some would bring the labor force, and they would have the right of veto, and they would have an equal share of power. Maybe it's a utopia, but it would help companies to be more co-determined, which means it would mean giving more power to the employees. Yes, I'd like to illustrate what Dominique has said based on the textile company. We're looking at a company where we produce too much, we pollute too much, and we don't have a lot of jobs. It exactly happened in the textile sector. You all know, or maybe not, but you probably know that France was very powerful in the textile industry, and we outsourced everything. That's why we could produce some cheap clothes in conditions with very poor working conditions in other countries. That's the only reason why we have access to cheap clothes. It's because we exploit women in Bangladesh or in China. So we lost a lot of jobs in the textile industry. 300,000 jobs in the textile industry have disappeared since the 90s. But we've lost. You would tell me we've lost jobs in textile industry, but we've gained some in the tourist economy. So, which means that in the 90s we're at 1.4 billion clothes sold in France per year. In 2022, it's 3 billion. So that means that a person in France buys 50 new clothes every year in France. So it's an explosion of the consumption of clothes in France, and yet we lost hundreds of jobs. Did we get back these jobs somewhere? No, we've also lost 30,000 in the business sector altogether. So we lost everything. We lost many jobs, astronomical numbers of jobs in regions of France where people stay unemployed for quite a while, such as in the northeast of the country. We dig deeper the debt of France because it's a sector that is in debt. We have created unemployment. We've got poor, and we have neither created jobs nor richness. So what is Dominique proposing is frugality. Frugality does not mean anything else than taking a step back. Those jobs that we've outsourced, if we bring it back to the country, we're going to recreate jobs. Of course, the clothes will cost more and we'll buy less of them. But if you look at the textile situation now, is people spend the same amount of money, they just buy more clothes. So you throw them away more, etc. So this frugality effect to reduce what we consume and produce it locally, it also has a lot of virtuous effects. If your clothes are expensive, once they are ruined, you're going to have to want to fix them, get them fixed locally instead of buying something at Leclerc or Shein. If they're expensive, you're going to look after how you wash them. You're going to be careful. You're going to protect them if you eat something, if you eat some spaghetti, and you're wearing a white shirt. But if you buy cheap clothes, you don't take care of them as much as you do if they're expensive. So that would lead to a massive creation of jobs. It will lead to a massive creation of richness in France. If companies are in France, that means local taxes paid in France. That means social charges paid in the country. So more money to fund schools. We can train better the police, etc., etc. It's very important, but what we put in the state budget is public service. So it's what everybody's using every day. And last, it is also a way to address the environmental crisis, because that's what it's about. If with this magical recipe created by Dominique, frugality, and relocalize production, it's not going to cost us more. On the contrary, it is very beneficial for everyone. So if the state was a bit smarter and willing to make money, that's the first measure that they would create. They would stop the import of Chinese clothes into the country. I wanted to add a last point before on the transformation of companies and jobs. I agree. Everybody agrees that, yes, we need frugality. We know that that's what is proposed by the IPCC. The idea is that it doesn't make any sense if it's not part of a deep transformation of everyone, because this frugality is perceived as a punishment today by the general the public. It's this idea of being deprived of something, and as long as we don't see those changes as a good thing, we won't be able to get everybody on board to adopt a new way of consumption. Because even if we change jobs, it implies that we also change our consumption habits. And today, our ideal of consumption that is promoted in advertising is always more, is it's growth, constant growth, consumption. And as long as we don't tackle that, and I'm a journalist, so I know the necessity to adopt change, and it's not a punishment. It's not that we're going to live less well than we did before. We won't be able to advance that because everybody's going to have to agree with it. People are going to want this type of jobs and these types of life. And that's not the case right now. That's why the environmental lobbyist is asking us to change our minds, because that's really what we don't have to advance all these environmental issues. I want to make a comment on. You want to make a comment on what Salome said? Yes, I would like to insist on this point. Of course, to change our minds, our mindset, but also to create a space, a democratic space with those issues that can get sometimes very polarizing. The more we're moving to along, the more we see the violences and a lot of tensions in regions that are impacted by drought. I'm thinking about Perpignan. I live in Perpignan, or with very high rates of unemployment. You also know that the elected officials are sometimes are influenced, sometimes for the good, in a good way. So the question of jobs is always in all the public debates, particularly when we talk about major infrastructures that we're not going to name here, but the question of jobs or destruction of jobs or losses of when we lose an infrastructure and what it's going to mean for the people who work there, we're going to have to find the space of discussion for trade unions, business leaders. They've all. So in my generation, I saw, all this movement of fighting for education for all, and people don't do that anymore. And we need to do it again, to relay the concerns that you identify. We've created a partnership with the manufacturer of transitions to talk to our politicians about our choices. It's not up to us to say in the region we're the best, but we're going to try to create a narrative with those who think, who can talk about the benefits of the policies that we put in place in terms of transformation.
No, I think we're really at the absolute heart of the problem. The Julia's example, it was very interesting because, and first of all, I'd like to remind you that I think this has kind of cooled down our enthusiasm in the sense that there's an extension of the domain of fashion. For instance, Juliette Shaw, an American sociologist, looked at this, an extension of fashion where the T-shirt today, consumption isn't just for need, but it's also to say who you are, to differentiate yourself from other people. Seto Veblen talks about this ostentatious consumption. This is a whole language. And confronted with this, we have to fight against the fact that a T-shirt is not just to cover yourself, it's to show to other people, and we've got to fight against this idea. And also the appetite of consumers for this. So the Chinese boutique, which has just opened up, it draws a lot of people. I think it's a collection every day or every week. There's a kind of rhythm of a renewal, 8,000 references per day. The second way of cooling down our enthusiasm, and you're better placed than me, is our obsession in France for the cost of work. How come all our textile and steelmaking industries have left? In the northeast of France, they're being doubly affected by this because of the cost of work. Today, we're continuing to relocalize industries for that reason. Overall, we need to listen to what the economists have to say when they're saying not only there's no point in localizing, but we would be doing it at a loss because we will continue to buy low-cost products elsewhere. We have to really incorporate this idea of a higher social and environmental cost as part of our thinking. We have to have new accounting laws or new indicators, really, and perhaps this will happen one day. there's a new European directive which won't force industries to change their behavior, unfortunately, in a sense, but which will make it possible to know more about the ways in which we can produce the social and environmental impact. So I think Julie is better placed than I am to talk about this. Today, we are looking at facing a major difficulty. It's not just a question of relocating or not, but when you buy a T-shirt, it's not simply for need, but for other reasons. I think it's very interesting what Dominic's saying. This obsession with work competitiveness. This is a battle that we'll lose, and we're losing this battle because the work conditions are correct in France, because it's a public service. Obviously, if you want people to be paid in a dignified manner, it's going to increase the cost of the work. This competitiveness for work hasn't existed until recently in the textile industry. With we're now in a situation where we've dropped the quotas for importing textile products from elsewhere. Textile in France is in competition with people who are slaves in concentration camps in China. Okay, getting the Uyghur to work doesn't cost a lot, but is that what we want? We're talking, is it simply a price-based competitiveness? I think the fact that we've raised the boundaries between countries, that we've lifted the barriers, is creating a situation whereby, for example, Salome was talking about liberalizing work. This means that we have to really look closely at what kind of competitiveness we're looking at. If it's something which destroys people, it destroys their salary, it's a competitiveness which destroys the richness, the wealth of France. We have to fight against this. And I think our strength in France is that we have ecological and social competitiveness, which is very, very high. We're the best. We have a social security. We have maternity leave. We have unemployment pay, and we're the best in class as far as the ecology. It's better to dye your products in France, for example, than anywhere else in Asia, because we have decarbonized energy, because we have the right kind of regulations. But this competitiveness in terms of work cost, the cost of employment, has an effect economically and in terms of unemployment. France is becoming poorer because of these issues. Even if we didn't care about ecology from an economic point of view, we can no longer continue. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm and your passion. Salome. Yes, if I come back to this idea of mindset, everything we're saying is impossible unless we change our perception. We're talking about energy issues today, but as long as it's considered as an accomplishment to go and do jet ski when you're on holiday, to have activities which consume a lot of energy, we really need to change our consumption. And once again, this raises the question about inequality, because I don't know how we calculate the level of poverty in France when we're talking about 32% of young people are under the level of poverty. This is calculated related to the median revenues. It's not the same as in France as it is in Ethiopia, for example. The way that we calculate or characterize poverty is based also on the way it's experienced, the feeling related to a standard of life. And this creates suffering. There's a sense of exclusion, a sense of failure. And in France, we're continuing, for many of us, about if we can't go on holiday, for example, which are consuming in energy, that this would be a kind of failure. And so we continue to have this mode of consumption as the same model. And once again, this raises the question of inequalities, which is not particularly a political issue, but is raised by scientists in the IPCC. There are issues that are raised in terms of social justice, written in black and white, to where we have to if social justice is not involved in fighting against the climate crisis, we're not going to succeed. We have to be able to, if we have millionaires who are taking private jets, it's so important. It's not just an anecdote. We can't expect people to consume less or to consume T-shirts differently and change their lifestyle. If next to this, in parallel, you have ultra-rich people who continue to have this lifestyle, and which is presented as a kind of example of success. And to come back to the idea of young people that I talked about earlier, a lot of young people want to be rich so that they're able to have that kind of lifestyle. And the influencers in Dubai are encouraging this kind of thinking, and it's used as a kind of model for social success. And I think if we really want to change things deeply, it's not just in terms of mindset. In the world of the media and culture, we have a lot to do, but also from a political point of view. As long as this kind of behavior is not only given value, but authorized, we won't be able to improve the situation. It's not just about a demagogical situation when we talk about employment, for example, where we talk about the privileged. It's because this really does have an impact, as the sociologists are showing. It has an impact on the rest of society, on our perception of the economy. When we're looking at unemployment, for example, we have to look at the question of mindsets, the way people see things. And it's not, I don't want to make everything politics about politics. But there is a correlation, and it's absolutely essential that we attack things from a political point of view as well. I'd like us to look at 2 points. Stop being in agreement all the time, you two. No, there are a couple of points that I think we haven't looked at in terms of a crisis of meaning in industry. The planet has limited resources. This is a truth that we have to face, that we all have to face at a certain point. And how do we get some order, how to put some order into this economic deregulation and this climate deregulation? Yeah, I completely agree with Salome, but I think we have to go further than our mindsets are. And I think we have to change values. For a long time, until the 18th century, we had a whole Christian philosophy which encouraged a certain level of temperance, a simplicity of life. There's been a completely radical change now with the elegy of vice, pride, and all the worst human tendencies, as long as we're allowed to consume more. These can be considered to be justified. Consumption today fills a whole range of functions to do with pleasure, this sense of being free. As I think to come back to this is going to be quite difficult. In the 1970s, for example, Baudrillard worked on consumption and showed already that the kind of machine that this creates to be able to distinguish ourselves from one another. But I think we really need to move away from this idea. We're living in societies that are based on growth, and growth is a good thing, and it's a moral duty to because it's one of the drivers of growth, consumption. And so we also have to really review this process as well, looking at the critique of growth. And we need to be able to establish new wealth indicators, basically to insert the gross industrial product related to carbon, for example, and social health indexes related to social justice. So this means in real terms that we would maintain our production in a certain, we would reduce it to, bring it down to social and planetary norms. How would we actually go about doing this? We have been confronted with a large number of insults, almost, on the part of economists and leaders. When we criticize growth, for example, I think people are accepting it a little more today. Otherwise, people don't take us seriously if we talk about degrowth. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area in relation to business and the regulatory system. We have to be able to set up social and environmental norms on a worldwide basis related to the TMC norms. We talk about free exchange, treaties related to free exchange, and this generalized competitiveness that Julie was talking about. We have to look at international norms in a world where we disagree on just about everything. It's difficult for businesses to deal with this in this context. We have to cater for the needs of our industry, but we also have to be able to help industries which are virtuous industries. There are 200 billion forms of grant to businesses in France without any conditions whatsoever, 70 billion in relief, in tax relief. Companies have an impact in France, and in France we're seeing that they want to work towards the general interest in economic terms. We have to create an interest. We have to create an economy for the general good. This is all the common good. The company convention on climate. In this, is there an awareness, an increasing awareness in the world of business? Are you listened to at the Élysée in the French government decision-making corridors? We're talking about direct members, for example, people who we work with the Business Convention for the Climate, for example. These are people that you work with closely. The Business Convention for the Climate is looking at transforming businesses from inside, whereas we have an advocacy role, where the mandate that we've decided on is to change the rules of the game. In terms of co-conditionality, we've had a recent mini victory. I've got to be careful here, where the suppression of production taxes is conditioned to the public publishing the figures on greenhouse gas emissions. So it may not seem much, but this is really going to change things. And it really comes into, from a cultural point of view, this notion of conditionality. I think the region is also, in Occitanie, you're also starting to, I hope I'm not spoiling anything here, but maybe I'll ask her directly about that. So the Occitanie region is going to create conditions for grants on the basis of the impact score on greenhouse gases, which means that we're able to assess the impact of businesses on the environment and socially speaking. And in Brussels, there's a very ambitious project whereby in 2035 there is no euro from the region which will go to companies which have an impact. So there's a whole support system. We're not expecting things to change overnight. There's a program to support businesses, which is very ambitious. I was in Brussels recently to discover this, and I feel very hopeful as a result, because with courageous, with brave politics, citizen movement, and support, we can begin to be ambitious in our overall policy. Okay, so she spoiled your announcement. Maybe you'd like to make an announcement. No, but it's this is what I was saying earlier. We see it's better to benefit from the indexes themselves. It's much more effective, as you say, than when I say it. So there's an excellent harmony going on this panel discussion. So over the last of the year 23-24, we're going to be asking companies to carry out this diagnosis with the impact score tool. We will also attach conditions to our grants, and at the same time, we'll be helping them, supporting them in the transformation process towards positive response to the diagnosis. Can we do anything else to support changes in the economy? We provide grants to companies. We help to relocalize for the textile industry, for example. This is happening in the region with the production of fibers, with the whole range of value chain of textiles. Where you're supporting a cluster for recycling, for everything which is second-hand in terms of clothes. And this is why I'm really insisting on the democratization aspect. And it's important to have discussions with citizens, because when we relocate, we also we're not going to pick up what's done elsewhere and do it in an identical manner. But we're going to be looking at the impact on real estate, the places where people live. And to do this, we need to be able to anticipate and to discuss with local residents, with joint consolidation, because there are increasing constraints in a region where global warming is much more having a much greater impact than other places in the world. And I consider that it's part of our responsibility to contribute to dropping the level of violence in our territories. The more we look at the territories, the more we're in the front line in relation to these tensions. We have to get away from just thinking in terms of GDP and think about the benefits of quality of life, health. It's absolutely crucial to do this if we want to think in terms of the territorial scale. Madame Borne and Mr. Macron, how does this relate to their positions? I think we're still waiting. The jury is still out on this aspect, but it's very important. We have to mobilize. We have to make our voices heard. And there are dates coming up in a few months with the European elections, and we have to go and vote. And this is going to be a decisive factor and everything to do with the policies and directives, which is going to be unraveled in relation to glyphosate, for example, everything that's happening at European Parliament level. So perhaps we might be able to hand over to the room here. There are mics. If the hostesses will be able to hand you a mic. There's a gentleman over here who wanted to ask a question. On the third row. Mr. Sourier, you're being filmed. So, everybody, so the first question is always rather tricky, but I've asked a lot of questions already. So Frederic Sitsonis, I'm a consultant in SME. There was something that was kind of lacking in your presentations, which have been very interesting, but it's related to the citizen. I'll tell you why. I've been saying, there are a whole number of injunctions to be made, but as citizens, we have a huge power. And when we talk about businesses and business models and their value, I'd like to remind you that the impact law came out recently with the code of employment, a code of work, with an impact on companies. All companies have as part of their statutes, a social vision, but also they should be looking at the societal and environmental impact of their activity. So to some extent, we're all able to act when we consider that certain companies are not doing the necessary work in this area. So from a legal point of view, we perhaps haven't looked at this, but perhaps between now and 6 months or a year, we could attack a company, for example, in Montpellier, which has its doors wide open because even though they have air conditioning going on. And the second thing that the citizens may be seeing is the name and shame process for businesses. Businesses hate having bad reputations, and as citizens on the social network, on social media, we can really point to them and say that their activities are not aligned with these social and environmental issues. But the citizen has a huge level of power. It can mobilize it. It can bring out legal cases as well. But if we start to look at what the little local company is doing, because it's not virtuous in us, we won't be able to change things we will be able to change things on a local level. And I think it's a way of thinking whereby we, as citizens at our own scale, the 200 people who are here, we have a huge amount of power to change things as well. Thank you very much. Salome Seke, would you like to answer? Yes, thank you very much for underlying the citizen aspect, because it is fundamental. I'm really being very cautious here because it can become a political tool to say, go ahead, citizens, take up the ecological issue with small gestures where we realize that it's not just up to the citizens, but this can and must be a driving force, whether it's name and shame, whether it's through legal action or associations. Citizen actors can improve the society, but there are individual gestures as well. I'd like to talk about this particularly because I'm a journalist, and I think information is really at the heart of the issue. And in France, the first media of the France, a means of information, are the people who surround them. So we have a huge amount of power simply by talking. I was talking about my uncle Jean-Michel. I keep citing him. I have nothing against people called Jean-Michel, but we have people around us, amongst our family and friends, who perhaps don't think in the same way. Name and shame works when you're aware of the gravity of the seriousness of the problem from a human and social problem. There are ecological issues that we're going to be sensitive to when we're aware of them. And I think there's a lot of... I think you can hear me. So there are a lot of engineers, for example, who've shifted thanks to Jean-Marc Jancovissi's speech presentations. It's had a huge impact because it's a way of approaching things which really speaks to people, which speaks to you. And this actually really creates this shift so that people are now believe in this system. Certain people are not bad ecologists or uninterested, but they're simply not aware of the extent of the problem. And I think we can raise people's consciousness in this, raise awareness, and as of that point, people will want to boycott companies, name and shame, and make policy. We can do name and shame on a political level as well. And this gives citizens a certain power in terms of political decision-making. But in order to do all this, people need to know about what's happening, not just, a quick summary that everybody knows, but really in depth in terms of the real concrete consequences of what's happening. In 2030, what will happen in France because of global warming or because of the lack of biodiversity? And I think a Citizens' Act is to inform each other and, as far as possible, to inform the people around us with arguments, with a common base of knowledge, obviously not by getting angry or losing it, but by having constructive conversations. And I think we can do this within the family unit. We are unaware of the extent of influence in a couple or amongst a group of friends. Sometimes people say, I'm no longer talking about this, it's too complicated. But in actual fact, if you have the time and energy and the patience to do so, it's part of a Citizens Act to share documentaries, for example, to share data or publications, anything that you have available, because in this way we can create the basis for the citizen change that we're hoping for. Would anybody else like to ask a question or perhaps approach another aspect? Margot, sinon, I'm an engineer by training. In fact, we're looking at raising awareness. In my company, we've set up, we get together on a Monday. People talk about what they've been doing during the weekend. And we've set up quality and safety issues related to the environment. We talk about environmental issues in our own way. We take personal time to do a 5-minute presentation, for instance. And it's raising awareness on every aspect, all the different topics, regardless, as long as it relates to the environment. Everybody's involved or invited. Is led by the younger people in the teams in general. It's working. We've never had any executive level presence, but sometimes the presentations can create embarrassment because it really puts people in front of the problem. There's an issue related to the context of the company, for instance. How can we do things so it's a combat which is by young people and by other generations, so that people, from their own point of view, they can say, the older you are, the more power you tend to have in an organization. But it's important for people to ask the question as to what they can do as individuals, how they can participate, or at least participate less in creating the problem. I'm not quite sure how we can bring along the decision makers. Does anybody have an answer to that? That's the whole point of my book, in actual fact. This is one of the questions I asked, to look at the media context, for example, and see that young people are much more likely to pick up issues related to ecology than older people. If not all young people are ecologists, it's not a uniform process, but in the most informed groups, this is the case. It's important to have an intergenerational aspect by being aware of the difference of power between the generations. It's not the young people who have the power to change things in France. 13% of the population, represented by 18 to 29 age group, are twice half as present as the people over 60. And so the action taken by the older generation is very important. This is, and the raising awareness, whether it's through young people, through children. If you ask people whether they want their children to be happy, you never get somebody saying, no, I don't care. Not necessarily their own child, but young people, it might be their nieces, their nephews. Most people want young people to have a future. And it's important. And they think that to do this is by creating through inheritance. They want to be able to protect their children one way or another. What I'm trying to get across is that this is not the case. If we can't find a collective solution to the ecological issue, we won't be able to preserve the future of the young generation. I think there's a lack of awareness about this, a lack of knowledge. And for the older people, and this is why I try to attack it from a sort of sensitivity point of view.
C'était parce que c'est qui a animé le débat. Mais donc, il y a quand même...
There's this question of generations that need to be raised at some point, because it's not all the young ones, it's not all the older ones, but you can see in the ballots, it's very clear. The young ones vote more for Green parties than the older ones. So they need to be, and the older ones need to be aware of what they pass down to their children and grandchildren. It's that they can't carry the weight of the change over their shoulders, and the young people, so they need to be helped. And that was the motivation of my book. It's just that cliches on young people are horrible in general, but it's even more intolerable that we're sacrificing the future of the younger generations. And if we had a bit more empathy towards the younger ones, if we understood them better, we could help change their future. So Dominique Méda, just a word to see is, I think it's great what you're doing. The idea is to enlarge the spaces for discussion on work. And one of the answers and how to get to go further is to better share power within the company. Julia Faure, you're atypical business leader. How do we change decision makers? We realize that we often have allies within the employees more than with the business leaders. It's important to have people who would help change things from the inside, because it's about the pressure that you put on the business leaders that's going to make them change. So I believe that there's also our generation, we forgot about it, but we should also get join a trade union. It's not very popular within our generation, my generation, but it's up until the point where companies themselves decide to share the power, we can take power as an employee, and that's what trade unions are for. I don't know if there's any union who's very focused on environmental issues, but I think that
les deux gros syndicats, CFDT et CGT, le sont. Hein.
Donc, déjà, les deux gros le sont. Au début, je comprenais pas la phrase, j'étais là. En tout cas, c'est...
What I realize is that institutional power is very important. The power that is given by law. And that's the trade union has an institutional power. It has to be consulted. And that's what we're trying to do. The MEDEF has an institutional power because they are the union of employers and they have to be consulted. So our goal at Impact France is to establish an institutional power. So I believe that we need cultural power, of course, put pressure on people, but with the name and shame and all that, making them feel shameful, and institutional power that can be exerted as an employee within the company. And the last stage is to do some sabotage, and that is only if your company does 95% of fossil fuels on 5% of renewable energy. So she's responsible for her own words. Are you part of a trade union? No? Yes? The gentleman in front. Hello, everyone.
Petite question un peu naïve, mais à la fois...
A very naive question, but maybe radical. Sorry in advance for that. I am a student from an engineering school. I'm specialized in renewable energies. I have a lot of examples of friends of mine who work in different companies. It goes from the associations, electricity companies, that's minor, and in general, companies that are just there for profits. And all my friends tell me that despite all that, they are often confronted to decisions where in order to do more megawatts, they're going to have to cut down trees, or that their colleagues are going to have to make some sacrifices. So structurally, the goal of the company is to do profit. It's often going to entail decisions that are anti-environmental. And that's a feeling that is widely shared among students of my generation and my promotion. But can a classic, standard company that is here for profit and structurally, how can I say, anti-environment, which means that every time there's going to be a decision to make, they're going to make the choice of profitability. And should that change and even banned, if I can take it further? So the question is, do we always sacrifice ecology for the benefit of profit? And is it normal that it's the majority shareholders that call the shots? That's an interesting question. What you say and what I share is that globally, producing is polluting. Even if produced well with renewable energies, it entails pollution. So if we don't regulate the bonus for vice, and we can pollute freely and look for profitability without having to be accountable on other topics of the environment, today, the companies, the biggest companies in the world are the most destructive ones. Is it a fatality? I believe that the companies have a real function, which is the point of a company is not the profit, to look for profit, is to look for efficiency in how to share the resources. And the fact that today there's a drift that means that some companies have a bad behavior, a selfish behavior, and that jeopardize humanity, it's mean that the system is drifting away. Why companies are looking for profit at all costs? Because at the end of the day, there's ways to make opportunities to make money. If we limited this opportunity, people would not be looking for that. So this is the real assessment that is being made right now. With a little nuance, for example, if you're a baker, even if you're looking for profit, as long as you live in your ecosystem and your community and you're facing your employee and your human being, you're going to tend to provide them with good working conditions. So I think it is to be nuanced. From what I see, it's more gray than black and white. It's not the bad guys on the one side who want money and then the rest of the world. But we're in a system that, if it's not modified radically, will always choose short-term profit rather than survival of humanity. I'm sorry, but I think we are at a time of the conference. We're going to have to give a very quick answer. We're in a capitalistic system where companies are aiming to make profit, and to make profit, they're prepared to do anything and everything. So we need to change the governance of companies, and that takes me back to what I was saying earlier: a real sharing of power between the ones who bring capital and the ones who bring labor. But it's true that we're not heading that way. We're heading the other way, and that's the way we've been heading for the last 50 years, because there are less and less public companies. But it continues despite the wall that we're facing and despite all the environmental and social crises that we're facing. I'd like to give you a quick update, because it's my job as a journalist to insist on the fact that it's not a matter of ideology. It might frighten some people, and I'm going to go back to the science part of it. If all countries in the world would respect the Paris Agreement, which no country does in the world, France doesn't do it. We haven't adjusted our economic system to agree to an agreement that we have signed. If we comply to our commitments, would reduce our CO2 emission by 2030. The UN tells us we need to decrease them by 42%. So we're miles and miles away from this. And if we hear what the COP concluded last night, is we haven't managed to even write down that we need to get away, to break away from fossil fuels, which isn't, even though it's an international consensus. And I don't want to keep bashing Total Energy, but it's just because it's a company that embodies this type of posture and positioning, because we let them make that kind of profit. But we should wonder why the CEO of Total Energy is part of the official French delegation at COP28. How is that possible? How politicians agree to that? When we talk about the world public interest, we're talking about millions of people exposed to climate change in vulnerable regions. That's what it's about. And yet we keep pushing forward private interests. It's not about if we like or not the private sector or profit. It's a scientific assessment to preserve the conditions of habitat of the planet. And that's why I find this COP absolutely depressing, because the oil company has way too much weight in this COP, and the research of this profit is incompatible with the limits, with the boundaries of the planet. Yes, of course, there are some nuances with the baker, etc. There are also going to be some companies where they will deal with profit in a better way, but the current companies are taking us right into the wall. I think we would have had much more to say, but there was another point that I would have liked to make with you, but we need to take a break. And thank you I want to thank the 4 speakers for your commitment. You put a lot of energy and passion into what you said. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to ask you to give them a round of applause. And I would like to applaud the people who translated live. Thank you. I think, Julia, you definitely gave them a bit of hard work. Yeah, sometimes I probably forgot to tell you that we have to slow down when we have simultaneous translation. Thank you to everyone. And of course, Salome is signing a book when you leave the room. Please don't miss that. I'm just going to take a 3-minute break and I'll be right there.